Venom is Spider-Man's most popular villain, a fact that Sony realized pretty quickly considering how they forced the character into Spider-Man 3 and released a trilogy of films. However, this is also shown through just how many Venom movies have been in development over the years, with even one predating Spider-Man 3. So back in the late 1990s, New Line Cinema, who owned the rights to Venom, hired David S. Goyer to write a standalone Venom film that took heavy inspiration from the Venom stories of the time, and the story that was cooked up was both what we'd expect from the character but also very different. In David S. Goyer's unproduced 1997 Venom script, a failed journalist named Eddie Brock becomes bonded to an alien symbiote after it arrives on Earth. As Eddie struggles to survive and understand his new abilities, it's revealed that the symbiote species views Venom as a traitor for seeking a true partnership from its host rather than simply consuming them. Meanwhile, serial killer Cletus Cassidy, who is awaiting execution, becomes the host of a high-ranking symbiote known as the Blood Hunter, transforming him into Carnage, with the US military attempting to capture and weaponize both Venom and Carnage. Now when it comes to the character of Venom, in Goyer's script, Eddie Brock is written much closer to a sad, beaten down everyman than a selfish prick like in the comics. Comic Eddie, especially in the 90s anti-hero run, is usually driven by a warped sense of moral superiority. He genuinely believes that he's chosen and that he and Venom are justified in what they do. Goyer's Eddie, however, really doesn't have that kind of confidence or conviction. He's a failed journalist, but instead of being arrogant, he's passive and strangely spineless, letting people walk all over him without much resistance. So his connection to Venom is what gives him confidence and power. In David S. Goyer's 1997 script as well, Venom is portrayed as a gleeful and darkly comedic force. The symbiote merges with Eddie Brock's psyche, amplifying his long-repressed rage he's felt being pushed around for so long in his life. With him and Venom together, they embrace brutal and creative violence, though don't think it's similar to Tom Hardy's version. In fact, the dynamic between Eddie and Venom is very different. In Goyer's script, the symbiote is far quieter when not in the Venom form. It actually very rarely speaks to Eddie directly, communicating mostly through dreams and psychologically appearing as a reflection in a mirror. There's no back and forth bantering as seen in the Tom Hardy version. My assumption for this creative choice is to emphasize how Venom and Eddie are symbolically connected. They aren't two separate beings, but one person. So Eddie and Venom treat each other as if a part of the same thing. Venom is also given very strange powers in this version. Venom can camouflage himself, fully shapeshift, detach from Eddie for extended periods, and even travel through phone lines and pipes even when still attached to Eddie, making it seem very cartoony, at least more than we're used to. Carnage is the main antagonist of this film, and he's what you'd expect from the character. He's something known as a Blood Hunter, one of the higher-ranking symbiotes in this world, who bonds with Cletus Cassidy, a charismatic and manipulative showman using television broadcasts to incite citywide riots and encouraging his Sons of Carnage to indulge in their darkest impulses. Carnage views humanity with utter contempt, seeing people as fearful and the world as a violent playground ripe for harvest by his kind. Unlike Venom, who seeks a partner, Carnage only sees Cletus as a host to feed off of, making him Venom's polar opposite. After Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, Sony began an immediate push for a Venom spin-off film, with Jacob Aaron Estes being hired later that year to write a standalone film that would continue Eddie Brock's story after his apparent death. But with Spider-Man 4 falling apart, the project lost its foundation and was quickly shelved. Following his apparent death in New York, Eddie Brock awakens in Death Valley Desert alongside the symbiote, which had reformed itself through various scraps. With no memory on how he survived, he hitches a ride to a remote diner where he meets Honey Horowitz, a tough waitress with a criminal past. When a biker gang storms the diner, Venom emerges to kill them, and after this, Eddie and Honey work together to craft a new public narrative for him. Venom is not a villain, but a misunderstood superhero. They frame Eddie as Venom's biographer, working on some kind of book about his heroics, and thus move to San Francisco to become vigilante crime fighters. Funded by a lucrative book deal, they take on white supremacists, drug lords, and corrupt figures, with Eddie increasingly embracing his violent powers. Their crusade takes a dark turn, however, when Eddie, consumed by rage, confronts the imprisoned serial killer Cletus Cassidy, transforming him into Carnage, who escapes and embarks on a citywide killing spree. Eddie, exposed as Venom, becomes a wanted fugitive who must find a way to stop Carnage before he hurts more people. This version of Eddie is introduced as a broken man who is forced to rebuild an identity with the symbiote now forever bonded to him, a fact that for a lot of the script deeply disturbs him, as he no longer could see himself as an individual. The arc Eddie and Venom undergo is complex and morally ambiguous. It's important to understand that Eddie isn't really a good guy morally in the script, and the same can be said for the symbiote. There are times in the script which show that at the end of the day, the symbiote is still inherently a violent being, one that enjoys killing and torturing people, even those who aren't even criminals, and the whole story in general revolves around Eddie and Honey lying to make Venom seem more righteous than he really is. The story is a deep dive into whether people can really change for the better, which makes the arc Eddie follows very compelling. This reflection is made all the more interesting by the villain Carnage. Cletus Cassidy in this world is a theater performer who kills people and makes them watch his terrible performances that rival Gal Gadot. However, he's eventually caught and sent to prison, where he manages to lure Eddie Brock and goads him into attacking, allowing a piece of the symbiote to merge with him and thus becoming Carnage. Carnage is Eddie Brock's dark reflection, an unstoppable force of chaos, and the living consequence of Eddie's inability to control his emotions. Now, these two scripts represent the Venom films that actually had scripts produced for them, but not every project had this luxury. Josh Trank's unmade Venom project, which was being developed around 2012 to 2013, was envisioned as a radical departure from what you'd expect from a superhero film, inspired by films like The Mask. Trank, fresh off the success of Chronicle, pitched a hard R-rated exploration of the character, one that explored Venom as a disturbing fusion of man and monster, suggesting that this version of Venom was going to be a very disturbing take, akin to what you saw in Trank's Fantastic Four film. The studio, however, rejected this edgy, horror-inspired vision. During the expansion of the Amazing Spider-Man universe in 2013, Sony greenlit a standalone Venom film as a key pillar of their planned cinematic universe. The project was entrusted to the writing trio Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Ed Solomon. Their vision was darker and more psychologically complex than the superhero norm, seeing Venom as a dark inverse of Spider-Man. As Kurtzman explained, Venom represented every line that will ever get crossed, a being that Peter Parker could never become. And as Avi Arad stated, the thing that made Venom so interesting was his moral ambiguity and how he was violent but also went out of his way to protect the weak. Though this is really one of the only things we know about the story of this film, this movie was designed to be a cornerstone of the larger Sony Spider-Verse, existing alongside projects like The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and Drew Goddard's Sinister Six film. However, the entire ambitious blueprint collapsed following the critical and commercial disappointment of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Sony's deal with Marvel. Eventually, this project would be shelved until it was revived to become the Venom film we all know.
You are a loser.